Alright, so since I did a little bit of a video showing my concerns regarding Lakatosian research programs and his view on uh, pseudoscience and yeah, touched on a little bit. I thought I might touch on Feyerabend's epistemological anarchism, which is very close to my own views, and it is very close to my own views coincidentally. I felt this way before I ever heard of Feyerabend, and while being um, exclusively influenced by people pushing things like Popper and Kuhn and Lakatos. So I came to conclusions very similar to Feyerabend independently. Um, so yeah, as usual, Wikipedia page on epistemological anarchism because it's convenient. Epistemological anarchism is an epistemological theory advanced by Austrian philosopher of science Paul Feyerabend, which holds that there are no useful and exception-free methodological rules governing the progress of science or the growth of knowledge. So far, I very strongly agree. It holds that the idea of the operation of science by fixed universal rules is unrealistic, pernicious, and detrimental to science itself. I strongly agree with this. The use of the term anarchism in a name reflected in the name reflected the methodological pluralism prescription of the theory. So here's where I have a problem. I don't think, given this, I don't think you should prescribe anything, as the purported scientific method does not have a monopoly on truth or useful results, which is something that I mention frequently. Science is not about truth or rigor. Also, science doesn't operate via the scientific method in practice. When we actually look at it and measure it, if you applied the scientific method to understanding how science works, you would quickly see that science doesn't work by using the scientific method. This is some populist bullshit that you're told in elementary school. It's not real. Feyerabend felt that science started as a liberating movement, but over time it had become increasingly dogmatic and rigid, and therefore had become increasingly an ideology. And despite its success, science had started to attain some oppressive features, and it was not possible to come up with an unambiguous way to distinguish science from religion, magic, or mythology. Yeah, so this is a point where I disagree with Feyerabend. I feel like it was always like this, and it's never going to be distinguishable from religion, magic, or mythology. Personally, I don't. I just kind of reject that entire premise until it's demonstrated otherwise. Because when you, like I said, when you actually measure um, science with something approaching the scientific method, what you're going to come back with is, if you're honest, something that really doesn't look like a populist view of science. The assumption that it started off as this like benevolent thing that was not oppressive. That nope. This this thing that it started off as not an ideology. No. This idea that let's see. That it was ever unambiguously distinct from religion, magic, or mythology. No, you can't actually attain that level of clarity because it is a religion. It just is. He felt the exclusive dominance of science as a means of directing society was authoritarian and ungrounded. I like that. Promulgation of the theory earned Feyerabend the title "the worst enemy of science" from his detractors. Yeah, I think I might be slightly worse because I don't even. So Feyerabend at least had the optimism that science once was and could again be something truly special. I don't view that at all. I just see it as a regular run of the mill religion for the most part. Like, yeah, some apparently correct things and useful things have come out of it. But some apparently correct and useful things have come out of Catholicism. Some apparently correct and useful things have come out of Shintoism. Like, there's no monopoly here. Rationale. The theory draws on the observation that there is no identifiable fixed scientific method that is consistent with the practices of the paradigm of scientific progress. The scientific revolution, which I reject that the scientific revolution even occurred, really. And so do you. Right? If you're able to look at something like ancient Greek innovation and discovery and stuff as science, well, that's a rejection of the scientific revolution. So it's amazing to me that somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson will sit here and in his show, Cosmos, he'll sit here and talk about the scientific revolution, but then right alongside it, he'll talk about shit that happened before it as science. Like, what? Plus, the entire concept of science is actually like a 19th century invention, right? Terms like physics, science, and some other ones were first utilized in the modern way in the 19th century by a single dude, like, proposed all of this shit. I forget his name, but yeah. So at the time that the scientific revolution was occurring, it wasn't perceived that way. The entire notion of the scientific revolution, the entire notion of physics, the entire notion of, like, a lot of things, chemistry and, right, all of these terms were invented by one dude in, I believe it was about the mid-1800s. 1858 is coming to mind for some reason, but that might just be my brain being fucking stupid. But yeah, no, like, most of this like philosophy of science stuff, it really started in that period, because before that, science just meant, like, the term just meant knowledge. So if we're figuring things out, yeah, that's science because it's knowledge. But that's a different usage of the term than the industry. Where the hell was I? It is a radical critique of rationalism and empiricist historiography, which tend to represent the heroes of the scientific revolution as scrupulous researchers reliant on empirical research. Whereas Feyerabend countered that Galileo, for example, relied on rhetoric, propaganda, and epistemological tricks to support his doctrine of heliocentrism. Yes, he did. That is true. And that aesthetic criteria, personal whims, and social factors were far more prevalent than the dominant historiographies allowed. Yes, that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. Right? So why do we believe in that Galileo's discoveries of things demonstrated heliocentrism? Why do we believe that? Because he found moons around Jupiter. How does that demonstrate heliocentrism? The only way to connect those dots is with a fuck ton of rhetoric and propaganda. That's the only way. And yeah, that wasn't the only thing he did but that was, like, seen as a critical component, right? But you can see Venus and Mercury with the naked eye, and you can see that they never go too far from the sun. So if we're taking the moons of Jupiter never going too far from Jupiter as evidence that these things orbit Jupiter, then the fact that Venus and Mercury never go too far from the sun should be evidence that those things orbit the sun, right? And hey, that was actually included in later versions of Ptolemaic, like whatever. That was included. You had those two orbiting the sun, and the moon orbited the Earth, and then everything else kind of went around. So, like, yeah, it's complicated, but you can fucking see it with your eyeballs. Heliocentrism was coming one way or another, proving that you have fucking moons around Jupiter. That ain't gonna do it. That doesn't really do it. what is required is rhetoric and propaganda and epistemological tricks, right? Because, oh, that we got things around Jupiter. That proves that things orbit the sun. What? That's shenanigans. You're just making shit up. Anyway, I think I'm going to cut it there because this just keeps going for a while. But yeah, I mean, as far as philosophers of science, I think my views align with Paul Feyerabend's the most strongly. Yeah. And probably Lakatosh the least strongly.